Hello, everybody. Welcome to your very favorite Spider-Man podcast. Here comes the Spider-Cast. I am your co-host, Michael, and as always, I'm joined by
Joshua Mervell. Today we're going to be chatting about Spider-Man comics from June of 1984.
That's right, and we are now a month in, or 2 months in, to the alien costume saga, you could call it, right?
Right.
And so, last week we touched on the first appearance of the black costume in all three Spider-Man comics, and so now we're kind of easing back into our regularly scheduled plot lines, except I kind of forgot about this, but no one recognizes who Spider-Man is.
Right.
Which is kind of an ongoing gag, but I don't know, I kind of figured he's climbing, on walls and he's shooting webs and he has the exact same eyes and he has a big spider on his chest, but I guess it's kind of smart that they did that. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, even the fact that he is still swinging through New York, but he's using his fists instead of his classic Spidey web shooting. It's coming from the top of his hand. So I don't know, there's a bunch of stuff. I guess the only thing that does carry over are the eyes. I mean, even the Spider-Man logo on his chest is different.
Right.
So right. I don't know. I kind of like that people aren't recognizing him. It's kind of like a nice little. It's like a new problem that he has, right?
Right.
Instead of having the same old Peter Parker dilemmas and things stacking up, it's just another new thing. Oh, great! On top of all of this, my life is a mess. Nobody likes me as a superhero, and now nobody even recognizes me and thinks that I'm a bad guy when they first see me.
Right.
So it's fun. Yeah, I like it.
Now, the other thing that's funny, an ongoing kind of subplot, is that, not a subplot, but a behind-the-scenes kind of thing, is I'm not sure if you've noticed that they go out of their way to have Spider-Man say, I can't even tell you what happened on the Beyonders planet because it's so crazy.
Right.
It's because those issues have not come out yet, right? And so either the writers didn't know or they just didn't want to reveal it to the public, right? Because it hadn't come out. So it's kind of funny. Now, one thing we didn't get a chance to talk about last week, and I wanted to touch on this, is that unbeknownst to the general public, the black costume was not conceived or designed by anyone working for Marvel Comics at the time. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so basically, it's a complex origin, but basically a fan named Randy Schuler, who was 22 at the time, submitted an idea to Marvel, which is very unusual because you're not supposed to submit unsolicited ideas, which basically means, it has to go through lawyers and stuff, and they can get sued if you accuse them of stealing the idea, blah, blah, blah. So this guy, Randy Schuler, submitted this idea, and his idea was that he wanted to give Spider-Man a black stealth-like suit designed by Reed Richards and the Wasp of the Avengers. Now, I'm reading this part from spiderman.fandom.com. Just so everyone knows that I'm not that savvy at research, okay? So basically, it was basically to be more durable and stealth-like instead of his old red and blue costume, right? Which was made out of just cloth or spandex or whatever. So I guess Jim Shooter liked the idea so much that he purchased the idea and told him that he would use it for a story. Now, can you guess how much Jim Shooter purchased the story idea for?
Oh, I mean, I would hope thousands, but...
Closer to $220 US. Okay?
No way.
Yes, $220. Okay. Now, granted, just to be fair, his concept for the costume was almost exactly what we see now, except that his idea was that the spider and the eyes would be red. Okay.
Right.
So as far as I know, the black and white was designed by Mike Zeck or Rick Leonardi. Rick Leonardi, who actually drew this month's issue of Amazing, okay? Now, we'll get back to that in a minute. Now, on top of this idea, it was John Byrne that had an idea in, I think it was Iron Fist. He had an idea to give Iron Fist a new costume that would just grow and, be able to change at a whim without him having to take it off and put it back on. But he never used the idea. So Roger Stern is good friends with John Byrne. Years go by, and Roger Stern is like, hey, you know that idea that you didn't use for Iron Fist? Do you mind if I use that idea? John Byrne's like, that's fine. So then he uses the idea. So then he adapts the idea for Spider-Man, and somehow Jim Shooter gets wind of this and incorporates it into the idea of how Spider-Man can get his new black costume. But Roger Stern ends up quitting and or getting fired from Spider-Man before he can really use the idea, which is why the last couple issues of Amazing have been plotted by Roger Stern but written by Tom DeFalco, right?
Wow.
So, yeah. So then Marvel goes on to use this idea. Everyone knows about the famous black costume. Even when he gets rid of the alien costume, he ends up designing a cloth black costume to substitute, right? He keeps it for about 3 or 4 years. Then everybody knows the famous, story that happens after that, which is the black costume comes back and ends up bonding with another person in the form of Eddie Brock, which leads us to Venom, which leads us to a few years later, what's his name? Carnage, which leads us to now this is decades of stories, okay?
Right, and just practically everybody in the Marvel universe has had like a Venom form now.
Right,
or a symbiote form.
Exactly. So, now granted, the alien part of the story, it was probably Jim Shooter, but the costume changing came from John Byrne through Roger Stern. And then the design of the costume really comes from this kid, Randy Schueller. Now, guess how Marvel thanked Randy Schueller for giving them this idea, besides paying him $220? Guess how they thanked him?
I don't know.
How about not at all? How about they didn't publish his name for like 20 or 30 years until he came out in public and basically told everyone that he was the one that thought of it. And I believe it was confirmed by Marvel, and they might have officially thanked him in some way or another since then. But I think that's pretty low that Marvel waited like 20 to 30 years to even publicly acknowledge that that someone else came up with the idea. It's kind of lame, but whatever. Just wanted to point that out because, I'm all about creator rights and stuff like that. And this guy, $220, that's outrageous. But
right, and it's not like it was just like some one-off like panel in a comic or something. This is something that blew up and became like a Spider-Man icon.
Right.
And then from that spun off into like its own character that's huge. I mean, Venom has his own movie now and is getting a sequel for his movie. Like that's insane.
Right. I mean, really, he should be getting royalties for everything to do with Venom, everything to do with the symbiote, right? The Carnage, the Planet of the Symbiotes, all that stuff.
Wow.
But anyway, okay, so lesson learned. Just like Jack Kirby said, comics will break your heart, kid, right? So let's get back to the fun stuff. Let's talk about Spidey in June 1984, okay?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, so we're going to start with Amazing Spider-Man number 253. Now, the first thing I want to point out about this is that it's drawn by... I mean, we're only 1 month into Ron Frenz's run, and he's already got a guest artist, so I'm not sure what's going on.
Right.
And we can talk more about this later, but while it is written by Tom DeFalco, it's penciled by Rick Leonardi, who's one of my favorite Spidey pencilers, and we've talked about him on the show before, but did the art stand out to you at all?
Yeah, it did stand out, but I think specifically because I'm so used to the regular style of Amazing that this more like sketchy, gritty style kind of popped. And not only that, I think it actually lends itself to this story in particular.
Right.
Like after kind of getting away from the Hobgoblin story, which was great, but that really felt like a supervillain problem, where this feels more of like a gritty street level mafia type of story.
Yes, right.
I think that the art really fits with this storytelling that's happening here.
Right. And the thing is this, the inker on this issue, I'd actually never heard of him, but his name is Bill Anderson. I don't think he's the most appropriate inker for Rick Leonardi, but his storytelling and his figures are so good that I don't think it even matters, which we can talk more about later. But let's just quickly summarize the plot. So basically, we are introduced. This is kind of a cool one-off story. We're introduced to a football player who's been told that he has to throw a game, and behind the scenes, we're introduced to this new kind of gangster in New York named the Rose, who will be another sort of mysterious figure for Spider-Man for the next couple of years on top of the Hobgoblin. Meanwhile, Peter Parker is, kind of getting ghosted by his aunt because she's upset that he dropped out of school, right? And then he finds out that Black Cat has actually been coming to his apartment and to the Daily Bugle looking for him, right?
Right.
Is that mentioned in this issue or another issue?
I think it's kind of like sprinkled throughout all three.
Right. Okay.
I think the main focus of Black Cat is in Spectacular Spider-Man.
Right.
That's when they kind of really go deep into him or her showing up to his apartment while he was gone, with the landlord stopping him in the hallway.
Right. Okay.
But I think in these three issues they really kind of go out of their way to kind of connect them and almost like show you that they're happening almost simultaneously.
Right.
I think in this one they even like mention like something weird is going on with Black Cat. She's not really she's hiding something.
Right.
And then in Spectacular we kind of catch up from the previous issue and then we kind of jump forward a little bit. So yeah, I feel like they're kind of trying to like tie up all their loose ends and fit these stories together, especially after Secret Wars.
Good point.
So so I think in this story they do talk about those issues.
Yeah, so basically what ends up happening is this football star refuses to throw this game, and so because of that, the Rose orders his goons to shoot him. So Spider-Man kind of comes in to try and save the day, and he ends up fighting the Rose and all of his goons, and then it's kind of and then basically at the end, the football star decides the only way that he can get out of this is to confess his crimes, right, to the public. And however, it's not really resolved yet because let's see here. I can't even remember how this ends.
Well, but there's a reporter that's been working with Peter the entire time. Like when we start off the issue, we actually see Peter Parker's been assigned to take pictures of this game, and there's a reporter there trying to get a story. I can't remember her name. She wasn't like
Wendy,
right. So yeah, she's kind of also along with Peter for this story every now and then, but by the end of it, she writes the story of the football player's confession,
right?
And she kind of ends it on saying it's a real shame that so much talent was wasted. Like all that potential is just gone out the window because of a choice that he made. And it's definitely reflecting on the fact that Peter Parker himself has dropped out of school. And that's kind of a waste of potential. And I really actually liked how this issue ended.
Yes.
Normally I'm not huge on like abrupt endings, but I think that this one was kind of a nice tie off and like showing the newspaper and the confession and the fact that you don't get to see Peter Parker's reaction necessarily. It's just kind of left with her words. I think was pretty powerful, and you don't have to have him like in his head about like, maybe I should take that advice myself. Like it's definitely not on the nose, and I love that.
You're right. Not only is it not on the nose for a comic book, but it kind of makes me realize that if this was a TV show, I'm pretty damn sure you'd see a reaction from Peter Parker. Mm-hmm. But because it's a comic book, I'm not saying they have to be more compact, but now that I think about it, I've seen a lot of comic books that end this way, where it's kind of just the whole thing is wrapped up in one panel, but it has so much impact that it's good. Like I don't know. It's hard to explain what I mean, but I don't know. I don't think you could quite get away with this on a TV show so abruptly without it feeling like you're having the rug pulled out from under you. But in a comic book, it feels okay. Anyway, that's what I think.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I mean, especially since a lot of times with the abrupt endings in comics, it's like Spider-Man is punching a bad guy, and then they're kind of like rushing, like, oh, we're running out of pages, and then he's just kind of like standing over the limp body that he just beat up, and it's like, like the cops will be here soon, and you'll be in jail for the rest of your life, pal. And then it says the end, right? Like it's just so like so unsatisfying. This is really nice. There's not like this like mustache twirling bad guy that he just comes and punches at the end of the issue. The Rose gets away, and it's really more about the football star and his like him having to deal with his consequences and knowing
Mm-hmm.
that confessing and turning himself in is the right thing to do.
Right, 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 right.
So yeah, I really like this issue.
Right. So now let's talk about this art because, like I said before, I love Rick Leonardi. This cover is awesome. Okay.
Hmm.
And here's the thing: is that I mean, I am a fan of Ron Friends, but I found that I think it's Joe Rubinstein who becomes his regular inker, and it just makes it feel like generic Marvel to me. Whereas this cover feels like it has such a strong sense of design. You know.
Right.
Like you have this guy's arms in the foreground, but they're completely pink, which is the comic book equivalent of putting something out of focus, right? So it's there, but it's not the focus of the shot. The focus is Spider-Man fighting these goons, you know? So I just think that's a really cool cover. What do you think?
Yeah, no, it's fun.
Yeah.
I like I also like the white background with like that like splash of color right in your face because
Right.
it's both out of focus, but it's bright enough where your eye does eventually lead down to it,
Right.
and it is like the man clipping the rose and like almost like beheading somebody, cutting somebody's throat.
Right. Good point. Good
So
point.
it's a definitely a nice like tie into the story, and it feels very like menacing and mafia like,
Mm-hmm.
like cutting a
Right.
rose. Yeah.
And also like what's the word I'm looking for? Like I don't want to say debonair, but this is the mafia guy, but he's like a sophisticated mafioso, right?
Right.
Like with the gloves and like you see in the comic he's got the suit and everything. And now as a kid I thought, oh, Tom DeFalco's a genius. But if you do go back and you read the Steve Ditko Spider-Man comics, I believe that he was just trying to recreate a character called the Crime Master. Because do you ever come across the Crime Master?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, kind of a similar, basically just a guy with like a mask, just like
Okay.
this, right? And then the Crime Master teamed up with Green Goblin, right? So this is kind of like, well, now there's Hobgoblin and the Rose instead of Green Goblin and the Crime Master, but that's okay. I
Right.
don't mind. It's still cool. So anyway, I just want to talk about a couple pages. So on original page 5, okay,
Hmm.
you see this classic shot of Spidey. He's in this football stadium, and I love the shot where he jumps up out of the way into the shadows to hide from the people walking underneath him, and then he changes into Spidey, obviously with the alien costume, so it just changes instantly. And then you see that bottom string of panels where he jumps down, then the costume goes over his fingers, and then that last shot. I mean, I think Rick Leonardi's anatomy is so perfect that even though you can't see any details of the muscles, I just think that looks so much like a real person's like actual outline. Like, what do you think?
No, it's really great. The form is perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, even him in the second panel on the bottom row there, like him
Right.
landing on the ground for some reason with that pose, like I can feel the weight of him hitting the ground,
Right.
and there aren't even any like action lines or anything. It's just I think the way that the form is and how it's
Yes.
drawn, it just has a lot of like volume to it.
Right. Good
And
point.
again, there's no shading. It's almost a solid,
Yep.
black blotch on the page, but it really works.
And this,
Um,
I gotta point out when they did Spider-Man 3, the movie, I think they really blew it with the black costume because even though the main part of the costume is black, they gave him the stupid webs, the
right.
silver webs. It just completely ruins the aesthetic. It's got to be solid black, just like this, right?
Yeah, I
With the big
agree.
white spider and the white eyes. That's great. But anyway,
Hmm.
and that's Rick Leonardi. Like I said, he co-designed this costume, so he
Right.
knew exactly what he was doing. And then I want
I
to.
also
Oh, go
like
ahead.
that on this page and throughout the comic, like Spider-Man is a little bit more like thin.
Yes,
Like he's still
absolutely.
like muscular and he
Yep.
looks really strong, but a lot of the times in these comics, they'll make him like super big and buff and
Right.
like almost as like big as Captain America.
Right. Right. Right.
And I think that the fact that he's like a teenager, or I guess now he's in college, but he's like a nerdy, geeky, like scrawny guy at first, and then even after getting bit by the spider, he did build like muscle mass, but he wasn't like gigantic,
Right. And
right? So,
even John Romita Sr. is guilty of that, of making Peter Parker too bulky.
mhm.
Whereas I think here, I mean, there's such a thing as making him too skinny, but here he's skinny, but he still has muscles, and they're
Right.
accurate, right? Like he looks like someone who's in shape.
I wonder if the costume helps with that too, and not having like the defined muscles drawn
Yeah, it
in.
could be.
But I really like how he looks in this issue.
Right. And then on the next page, it's another great page of Spidey swinging around. And then in the middle of the page, you see that shot of Spidey holding the web there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure that was used for a corner box for like web or spectacular or something, but I've definitely seen it used before. And so it's just kind of cool because almost every shot of Spider-Man by Rick Leonardi is like usable for, marketing or
Right.
posters. They're so perfect,
Mm.
But anyway, I'm just flipping through to see if there's any more. Not really, but yeah, like I said, even like the fight scene near the end, like
Right.
on original page 18 when Spider-Man's leaping through like the crowd of goons and like kicking and punching them all. It's just a great shot.
I also really like the confrontation at with the mob bosses at the beginning with the football player, and
Right.
they're standing in like a parking garage or something. Let me
Yep.
see. It's original page 7 and 8.
Okay.
I love the layout of everything. You can really see what's going on, and like where they are in space, and nothing is
Right.
lost in the action. I think
Yeah.
that they did a really great job of this confrontation. Like they're just talking to each other at first. They walk up, they start getting heated, and the football player jumps at one of the guys, and
Right.
like you could just follow the entire action of how it goes, how it plays out, and nothing is lost on the pages. And I think I think that this issue, all in all, was great.
Yes, and like the backgrounds, there's a couple panels with empty backgrounds, but for the most part, he puts some nice detail in the background, so you always know what's going on, right?
Right. And I think too, because that's when things start getting heated and there's action,
Right.
the background is no longer needed, and your focus is what's happening. Where before there's detailed backgrounds because you see he's out by his car, and then you see the other car pull up next to him in the parking lot, and then they get out and you see the buildings and where they are, and then when they start attacking each other and jumping at each other, that's what's important. And then when that confrontation ends, it jumps back to having a detailed background. You can see
Right.
the parking garage roof, and then the details of like the sewer and the water leaking down into the grate.
Right. Yeah.
So
Good point.
yeah, I really love the layouts in this one too.
And I should point out that Rick Leonardi was actually the regular artist on Spider-Man 2099, which I unfortunately never really read, but just because I love his art so much, I'm eventually going to pick it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe
But anyway,
maybe we'll have to take a look at that on the podcast one day.
I believe we'll get to it one day, 1993.
All right.
One day. Anyway, okay, so I recommend this issue. What about you?
Yes, definitely.
Awesome. All right, another classic issue of Amazing Spider-Man. Okay, speaking of, actually, no, not speaking of classic, but now we're going to jump to Marvel Team Up
Right.
with Spider-Man and Captain Marvel. And Josh, you can tell us what this one's about.
Right. So in Marvel Team Up 142, we see Spider-Man in his new black costume hovering over this science fair that's happening, or this science museum, and they're talking about this new special foil that's supposed to be a really expensive and really rare metal.
Right.
And lately, there have been a lot of reports of people stealing this metal. So he's thinking that this is going to be a good spot to hang out, because more than likely it's going to get stolen. And sure enough, these goons show up. They're in these like really goofy, like gold and green costumes.
Right.
And they show up and they start zapping the place, and Spider-Man swoops in and stops them from stealing the foil. And before he can tie them up, they actually zap away, and they just kind of like vanish into thin air. And then we cut over to Captain Marvel, Monica Rambeau, as she has a day off from being an Avenger, and she's walking through a maritime museum. and she's looking at this. She just so happens to be looking at this rare like ruby or gem, where when these guys show up again here and they try to steal this gem, and she stops them, and again once again they disappear, like just kind of out of thin air.
Right.
Sorry, something else important that happens too. While she's chasing them down, she loses her power. She's unable to turn her body into energy anymore. And just at the last second, as she's falling to the ground, she's able to switch it back on, and she flies away. So she tells the science somebody at the museum that she'll take care of the gem. And we cut over to some bad guys, and we're kind of hinted at this like plan that they have that's going to hurt a lot of people, and it's kind of vague. Spider-Man and Captain Marvel end up meeting up because I can't remember Peter, because I know Peter Parker. Peter Parker's at the Daily Bugle, and he knows that there's a story that comes out that Captain Marvel was just fighting some goons that disappeared. So he knows that the stories, the events must be tied together. So he goes to see Captain Marvel, and the bad guys show up again to steal the gem, and they're transported. Oh, no, sorry. He throws a tracker on them when they transport back, and they're able to trace them back to their secret lair, where there's this machine that opens up to other dimensions, and they need the ruby to channel the like beam of light to jump to the other dimensions. And this bad guy, who's in charge of Pride, or is like, it's like an acronym. I don't know, a population reduction by interdimensional expulsion.
Right.
So it's like this bad guy's evil plan is that he thinks that the world is overpopulated, and his idea is to cut it in half, which is very like MCU Thanos.
Right, exactly.
So he invented this machine that will beam hundreds of thousands of people to another dimension, to inhabitable planets, to live their lives somewhere else that's not Earth. So that way Earth has a fighting chance of survival. And Spider-Man pretty much just like makes the machine explode, and that's that. But we're left with a bit of a cliffhanger by the end of it, where Monica Rambeau turns into energy, presumably something that has to do with this like machine, and she's unable to turn back into her human form. Right.
She might be in her energy form forever, right? But I kind of doubt it, but yeah.
Yeah.
So once again, this issue was written by David Michelinie, drawn by Greg LaRoque, inked by Mike Esposito. It's kind of just another standard issue of Marvel Team Up. Not great, not bad.
Yeah, it wasn't awful. I don't think there was really a time where I was like, oh boy, here we go. Like there,
right?
I thought that Captain Marvel and Spider-Man stories connected really well. They were kind of like both at separate incidences with these goons, and they had to team up together to figure out what was going on. The fact that Captain Marvel was involved, and it has to do with like energy and like dimensional stuff, makes sense and feels right. Spider-Man taking pictures and going to like a science exhibit feels good. Like it makes sense that he would know about this like special metal foil too.
Right.
And it would be something that he would be interested in tracking and making sure that no more of it gets stolen, at being a scientist, or like, I guess a former science student. So that all felt right. I guess it was just, I'm not sure. Maybe it was the dialogue itself that felt a little dry, or...
Yeah, I think, I love David Michelinie, but his dialogue is kind of just, again, standard, I'd call it,
Yeah.
Like, it's not great, but it's not bad. It's kind of just standard 80s superhero dialogue.
Right.
And yeah, the plot was definitely fine, but it was a little bit generic in that you could have probably inserted other characters into it and it wouldn't really have changed, right? I mean,
Yeah.
maybe not Captain Marvel, but Spider-Man definitely.
Yeah,
But
I think it was fine personally. Like I think that the characters felt like they belonged in the story, but they weren't.
right,
It wasn't like if they were taken out, the story wouldn't suffer either.
exactly, right.
So
So I give it a mild recommendation, but it's definitely not essential reading. What do you think?
yeah, I feel the same. I would recommend this to somebody, but yeah, I don't know. There's not much else to say about it. It was a pretty average issue of Marvel Team Up. If you've listened to the podcast before, you know our feelings about Marvel Team Up.
Right,
So definitely take this recommendation with a grain of salt.
right. Poor Marvel team up,
I
right?
know.
Oh well.
And we're
It'll be
almost done.
Yep, it'll be over soon. It'll be over soon. Don't worry. Okay, so now let's jump to Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, number 91. I guess since we don't have a guest this week, I can quickly summarize this one.
Okay.
So basically, we get an opening that is kind of forced, in my opinion. Black Cat doesn't even believe that this is Spider-Man, which is preposterous. But okay, so it wastes a couple pages, so I guess it gets the job done. He convinces her that he's Spider-Man by leaping around and using his powers and then grabbing her, right? So that I guess convinces her. So now she's fine. And then he gives the old flashback to last issue or to the last month's worth of issues of everything that's been going on, blah blah blah. And then we jump over to the Blob, and so there's this other subplot that's been going on, I guess, picking up from Marvel Fanfare number 7, where Eunice the Untouchable, his powers are out of control. And so it's kind of an interesting scene because he's floating in the middle of this tent and his power to repel things is actually what's holding the tent up. However, Al Milgram's art is so pedestrian that he basically just drew a guy standing up sideways in order to show that. So he didn't really get creative with the position of this guy, right?
Right.
But in the middle of the Blob talking to him, Eunice actually dies. And so now the Blob is really pissed off. And so he decides he's going to, I guess, destroy New York, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we get kind of a parallel with that classic Spider-Man issue where Juggernaut attacks New York, except this is not nearly as good. And so it's basically an issue of Spider-Man and the Black Cat trying to fight the Blob, not really getting far with him. And as we said, the Blob's power is... See, the Juggernaut's power is he can't be stopped. The Blob's power is he's immovable, right? He's an immovable object. So
Right.
basically, they fight him and fight him and fight him until he decides to throw a temper tantrum, sit in the middle of the road, and then he's kind of just repelling traffic around him, so no one can really touch him, but they also can't go around him, and because he's sitting in the middle of the road, and that's pretty much how it ends. It's kind of like supposed to be a funny ending, like a wah wah wah, where he's kind of just stuck in the middle of traffic in New York City, and that's the end.
Yeah. So I think the big thing with the story too is that like Black Cat wants to tell Peter about her powers because he doesn't know yet, right? So that's kind of what this like issue is supposed to be about, but nothing ever happens about it. Like,
right.
And I'm just like, is this going to be the new Black Cat in the hospital, or new Spider-Man doesn't want Black Cat teaming up with him? Like, is this going to be an every issue thing where she's about to tell him that she was experimented on, but no, we'll wait till next issue and we'll reveal it then. Just like, nothing happened. Like, nothing changed from beginning to end with Peter and Felicia. Nothing. And it's so frustrating. And the thing is, I kind of like the stuff with the Blob. I don't know, he's kind of an uninteresting character as a whole. So the fact that they gave him an interesting like way to be included in the story and giving him this like friendship and this tragedy that's happened in his life is interesting. And I kind of want to see that and how it ties into the story. And then by the end of it, he's just sad and goes into the street. Like, there's nothing that really happens to make him change or like
good point.
Stop. Like, I think that I don't even like what happens. Like they're talking to him, and he just gets sad. Like I don't even think that Peter or Felicia really do anything. Like he falls into a hole and he gets out and just starts crying in the street.
Right.
So
yeah, basically he just feels like because he created a big hole in the ground that he's like, my luck's going from bad to worse. So maybe it's like the straw that broke the camel's back kind of thing. And then he's like, friends, I had a friend. So it's kind of like he basically just starts getting all down on himself, and then he starts crying basically. The one thing I'll give this comic, though, is at least his motivation is somewhat original, that he's just upset that his friend died, so that's cool, right?
I mean, he's a supervillain. He's kind of known for being a little, like, unstable, and, like, I think that his powers of, like, being immovable, and the fact that, like, something has happened to him and he's forced to do something when he's not normally, one to be forced to do anything. Right? Like, the fact that this thing happened to him and he had no control over it.
Right.
And his powers couldn't do anything to stop it is like kind of interesting. And giving him this friendship, and he's like almost like he's the only one who was able to walk into the tent because he's immovable. But even like Eunice's power of like gravity pushing him back didn't do anything. His skin is like rippling.
Right.
And he's still not moving. And, he's able to see his friend in his last moments is really like touching. And and then after that it just kind of falls into the classic Peter Parker's The Spectacular Spider-Man, Felicia and Peter drama.
Well, and also the art is not bad. I mean, the stuff where they're fighting the Blob is pretty creative. Like when Spider-Man is like trying to attack him, and his hands kind of get like enveloped in his like, fat basically. Like there's some pretty creative stuff there. I don't know. I mean, I know a lot of people complain about Al Milgrom's art, but it's actually pretty good in this issue. It wasn't bad. So, do I recommend it? Again, kind of, I actually would rather read this than Marvel Team Up still. I still think it's slightly better. What do you think?
I don't. It's pretty close this week. Honestly, I think I liked Marvel Team Up better this week.
Really?
Surprisingly, yeah. I think I'm just tired of the story not going anywhere with Felicia and Peter. It's just frustrating that like it's the same thing every week. I don't know.
I know it's like.
Sorry, go ahead.
It's like just like he's just spinning his wheels, just wasting time, right?
Yeah, I agree.
But anyway, what were you gonna say?
It's probably also important to make a quick note for next issue that there is a moment where there's this figure in the shadows that's watching Peter fight the Blob,
right?
And he says something, or this figure says something about perfect. I was going to attack him, but it's better for him to fight the Blob and wear himself out. That way there's no trouble when I jump in.
Yep.
So we're kind of getting a little hint of what's going to happen next issue.
Right. And then we get the setup. So at the end it says next issue, the answer. Right. So I don't know if that's a play on Steve Ditko's The Question, but we'll find out.
Right.
But anyway. So yeah, mild recommendation for me, but again, this is not a comic that I don't think I might have had it as a kid, but I definitely sold it if I did. So obviously I didn't love it, right? And I still don't love it, but it's okay. What's your final word?
I think I'm a little biased because we've been reading Spectacular so much that I'm like so tired of this story happening over and over again that I wouldn't recommend it myself. But I also don't think it was a bad issue. So like, if this is your first issue of Spectacular Spider-Man, I would recommend it. If you are like caught up at this point, I would say you wouldn't miss anything if you skipped it.
Good point.
So.
Whew. Okay, so the good news is, like I said, I believe Al Milgrom wraps up his run around 100. So at the same time that Marvel Team Up ends, Spectacular is going to get a minor makeover with a new writer. So I'm looking forward to that. Yep.
That's going to be a That's going to be an exciting time for
Yes.
Spider-Cast, that's for sure.
That's right. But in the meantime, stick with us. We've still got we've got to complete the Alien saga. We've got a few crossover issues coming up in future episodes. And you'll notice this week that Josh has designed our new Spider-Cast logo. Thank you, Josh.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. All right. And you can take it from here.
Yeah, we also want to thank you guys for listening to the podcast. It really helps when you leave us a review over on Apple Podcasts, or you can drop us a line on Twitter at HCT Spidercast. It really helps when you guys keep in touch. Let us know what you guys think about the podcast and about the issues themselves that we're reading. We really want to keep that conversation going, so please keep in touch.
That's right. And next week, if things go according to plan, we will have a special returning guest, Adam Pelche from the Windsor Public Library, so that should be fun.
Oh, nice.
Yep. So until next Monday, this has been Here Comes the Spider-Cast.
All right. See you then.